that it can be streamed to the apartments, right? Can you all hear me okay? Awesome. New mic. Works great. I'm going to give just a couple more minutes just in case people are running a little late. Oh, I'm sorry. Really? That is good. Okay. Is there somebody I could maybe talk to just figure out like how to relay that to our leaders? Yeah. Yeah, I know there's one in Wake Forest that when I did the diabetes series there, they actually had me on their YouTube channel recorded. Oh, that's so good. I'm so glad to hear that because I think this subject in particular of the aging brain is very popular nowadays, and a lot of information that hopefully will help a lot of people reduce their risk. So that's good to know. Thank you. I'll start in about 2 minutes just to allow everybody to get settled. Has anyone in here heard of the local Alzheimer's prevention program that's being held at Kernodle Clinic? No? You're familiar with Kernodle Clinic, probably. Yeah. There's a neurologist there named Dr. Shaw, and he is running an Alzheimer's prevention program there. So he gets a lot of people who might have genetics for Alzheimer's and want to learn the lifestyle changes they can do to prevent it. And a lot of his patients are going through that program too. I think I'll go ahead and start. You think we're good? Okay, awesome. So, today's subject, the aging brain, and we're going to talk about what's normal and what's not. And that's all going to make sense in just a little while because we're going to go over cognitive decline that's part of the normal aging process. And then we're going to go over cognitive decline that is not a normal part of aging so that you can all learn the difference. A lot of times, if we do things that maybe are not in our usual character, like forgetting where we put our keys or misplacing our glasses or forgetting so and so's name right after they told you, things like that are more normal cognitive decline, but I want to make sure that nobody in here struggles with, oh no, is it happening to me, right? So we're going to kind of go in depth of what the differences are, and we're going to go over 10 higher risk red flags that would point in the direction of probably wanting to talk to a doctor. So we're going to cover all of that. We're also going to go over dementia treatments that are currently available and some lifestyle tips that have been known to reduce the risk of developing dementia and, in particular, Alzheimer's by as high as 60%. So it's very possible to lower the risk by a great deal, even if you have genetics for the disease. And feel free to ask questions as you have them too. It's a pretty small group, so I don't think it's going to hold us up at all. Before we get into the entire subject, it's very important. I know you guys all know how important the brain is and how much it's responsible for, but it's always helpful to know what the different parts of the brain do because if any part of the brain were to start diminishing in any way through trauma or damage or aging in particular, you can see all the different symptoms that might be associated when any part of the brain starts to decline, right? So the frontal lobe, exactly where it sounds, it's right in the front. That is for thinking, planning, problem solving, reasoning, and basic motor skills. So that's a lot of things to have symptoms in as far as declining goes, if anything were to happen to that part of the brain. Then you have the temporal lobe, which is right in the middle, that bright pink part. That is memory, understanding sounds, and that's where the hippocampus lies. So when we say memory, that's what we're talking about as far as somebody introduces themselves, you remember their name, right? Or anything that you learn throughout the day, once you have a good night's sleep that night, it's in your brain the next day, right? Memory. Also understanding sound. So as I talk, you're understanding what I'm saying, which we all take for granted, right? But if that part of the brain were to decline, people can struggle with that, right? The brain stem, people used to just think that just connected the brain to the spinal cord and that's all it did, but it's actually a vital part of us living every day, right? Heart rate, pretty important. Breathing, also important. And blood pressure. So those are three big functions that are not voluntary, that are all controlled in the brain stem. Then you have parietal lobe, which is all sensory. So anything that you touch and feel, if you have pain, things that taste, all of that is controlled in that part of the brain. Occipital lobe, anytime you see that OCC, what do you think about? Ocular, that's the eye, exactly. Yep. So that translates everything that it sees, right? And the cerebellum is for balance and posture, and it coordinates voluntary movements, right? So that's just walking, or if you wave to somebody, it's your brain telling your body what to do voluntarily. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That is understanding sounds you hear. Uh, where is that one? Temporal, exactly. Yeah. And what's interesting too, I'm glad you mentioned that. We're going to go over this, but there's several different types of dementia, right? And they affect all different parts of the brain. Alzheimer's affects pretty much the entire brain eventually, but there's some different types of brain trauma that can cause dementia. So it really is about which part of the brain is damaged, and that's why you see certain symptoms. So in that case, for example, that long-term memory of music is still there. They're still able to compute and understand that, but maybe not remember the song they just heard, right? It's a very fascinating thing. So cognitive decline is normal. There is normal cognitive decline. So you can all have patience with yourselves, hopefully, and have some grace because the human brain doesn't stop developing until what age? Any guesses? When the brain reaches its full volume. What age range? Mid 20s. Mid 20s, it reaches its full potential. So if anyone has grandkids that are not quite at that age yet and they're making bad decisions, just give them some time. Their brains are not fully developed yet, right? After that, maybe after age 30, okay, they don't really have as much of an excuse after that. But once you hit 30, a really fun thing starts to happen. Your brain starts to shrink. So great, right? This class is meant to be not depressing, so we're going to get into some good stuff too. But I want you all to know that everything on that list up there is normal. So you might have some memory issues, like where did I put my keys? What was the name of that actress that was in that movie we just saw? What was that person's name I just met at church last Sunday? That's normal, okay? Especially if eventually you remember, right? Or you find your keys. Um, Processing information can take a little longer too. If I just spew out a bunch of facts to somebody who's maybe 6 or 7 years old, they're going to process it super fast. As we get older, that processing speed slows down, kind of like computers, right? They start to get a little slower, phones get a little slower as they get older. That processing speed will slow down, and that's also normal. Okay. Speed of learning decreases. I think we've all heard that learning a foreign language is a lot easier when you're a kid versus when you're 60 and up, right? That speed of learning slows down as we get older. And again, this is not guaranteed to have everything on this list as we get older. These are just common things that happen when we get older, okay? I've definitely known people who are like 90 something years old still doing amazing in all of these things. So this is just very generalized, very common things, not necessarily absolutely happening to everybody. Reaction time increases, meaning our reflexes get slower. So, playing catch with your grandchild might get a little harder as you get older to respond to that ball coming at you, right? Or playing video games with your grandkids. Has anyone tried playing a video game nowadays with the grandchild? I'm not allowed to anymore. Okay. It's too frustrating. My oldest son, they are so fast at processing things, right? Like he'll have an entire house built, and I'll just be figuring out how to walk across a field, right? And I'm like, how did you do that so fast? I don't understand. But so that reaction time definitely gets a little slower. And then multitasking gets harder. So it will be hard to have a conversation with somebody on the phone, maybe while you're cooking or following a recipe at the same time. Some people are more gifted at multitasking than others, but that indeed also gets harder. So remember, everything we just talked about are all normal parts of getting older, okay? So this is in your handout. If you ever need to remind yourselves if any of these things happen to you, you have them written down now. And in the back of your handout, you also have all the resources used to create this presentation. So you can go to these websites and get even more information on that. Any questions on this part? Okay. So, does anyone know how Alzheimer's and dementia are related to each other? Yep, memory loss, definitely. So, if you think about it, right, like viruses, colds, the flu, COVID, all of those are viruses, and viruses just like a big umbrella, right, of sicknesses. Dementia is the big umbrella of different types, right? Alzheimer's is just one type of dementia. It is the most common type, it's the most diagnosed type, but there's several different kinds of dementia. Alzheimer's just being the most common form. Anyone know of any other types of dementia off the top of your head? Lewy body, yep, that's the one Bruce Willis has, right? That affects behavior and speech. Lewy body dementia. Yes, the vascular dementia. Yep. So if somebody has strokes, for example, and the blood vessels are damaged in the brain, that can definitely lead to dementia. Yeah. So many different kinds. Parkinson's, generally, as Parkinson's progresses, sometimes that person will show dementia symptoms. There's can be dementia as a result of something as simple as a fall that caused head trauma, multiple concussions, car accidents that cause head trauma, anything that damages the brain or can cause those brain cells to die will be a part of dementia eventually. Does that make sense? Yeah. So Another thing to know about dementia, especially Alzheimer's in particular, is it does get worse over time, right? It's not something that will just stay the same forever. It will tend to progress. If you guys have known somebody with Alzheimer's in particular, you all know what I'm talking about. It just keeps progressing. The speed of progression might vary, right? Sometimes it will progress really quickly. I've also known Alzheimer's patients to do a good 20 plus years after their diagnosis. So it really just depends on the person, their care they're receiving, their lifestyle, so many different things, right? Um, but it's important to know that Alzheimer's is just one type of dementia. Sometimes people get them confused and they'll just call everything Alzheimer's, right? But it's a very specific type of dementia. Okay, so these 10 warning signs are in your handout, so don't feel like you have to remember all of these, but I want you to think about these types of symptoms are out of character for somebody, right? And I don't teach this class for you all to look at yourselves and wonder, do I have this, right? I teach it more so you can watch your loved ones, watch each other, family, friends, and if you notice anything like this, their family needs to probably see a doctor. But I think if any of you in here have experience with somebody with dementia or Alzheimer's in particular, usually they're not the one to take themselves to the doctor, right? It can happen, but it's not as common. Usually it's a family member or friend that takes them. So one thing you're looking for is severe memory loss, meaning this affects their day-to-day ability to function, right? We're not talking about, oh, I misplaced my keys one day or my glasses, or I left them somewhere. We're talking about like 15 pairs of glasses gone missing in, 6 months or something like that, or finding keys in the freezer or just weird places. Anything that affects their day to day life as far as severe memory loss. Problems with planning or solving problems. So, say a person used to be a chef, right? Used to follow recipes, and all of a sudden they're not able to follow a recipe anymore or make their bed the way they used to. They forget the steps. So, familiar tasks become a lot more different in the brain of somebody with dementia. Uh, Driving is a big one. So let's just say you worked the same place for 30 years, drove there Monday through Friday. You were on autopilot getting there and home because you've done it so many times. And one day you forget how to get there and you end up somewhere you don't even know where you are or how you got there. That's a red flag, right? Or if somebody you knew did this, that's a red flag. Language problems, not carrying on conversations like this person used to, maybe getting really uncomfortable in social settings. Again, this is a different behavior than what the person had before, right? Confusion with time or place, forgetting where they are, right? Maybe this person used to always love going to their grandchild's baseball games, right? Wouldn't miss a single one, knew everything going on, enjoyed themselves, talked to the other parents, and eventually they didn't know what was happening, would want to go home because they were uncomfortable, couldn't really follow the game anymore, maybe ask repetitive questions. So these again are things that are not normal parts of aging. Any questions so far on the first 5? Okay. Loss of good judgment. Once in a while, everybody does this, right? Maybe especially in high school or college days. But this is an adult who does this regularly, making bad decisions, like maybe yelling their social security number out for everybody to hear when they go to the doctor, or walking outside at night on a busy road, or just doing something dangerous, forgetting that they needed to take a shower or brush their teeth. So, again, just things that are out of the ordinary for somebody. We talked about misplacing things. Personality changes are huge because this person's brain is not functioning right. So, a lot of times that affects them emotionally, right? They can get irritated faster, they get stressed out and overwhelmed a lot easier. Sometimes they can withdraw and act depressed because their whole environment seems different, right? And trouble with visual images, this tends to happen later on as something like Alzheimer's progresses. That occipital lobe part of the brain has trouble recognizing what they're seeing. So you might show somebody a picture of your pet, and if their disease has progressed enough, they might not be able to recognize what it is, right? Like you're saying, oh, this is my dog's head, this is my dog's tail, and they can't understand, right? Or looking at a book or something, not understanding what they're looking at. And withdrawing is very common because the person gets very stressed or anxious around people and not understanding their environment, maybe not being able to hold a conversation. So they tend to keep to themselves more because it's sometimes they know what's going on, like know something's happening, but they don't really understand it. So they just feel better when they keep to themselves. Has anyone had experience with this with somebody they know? Raise your hand if you have. Just one person. Wow, that's phenomenal. If anyone has had experience with any of these symptoms with somebody they know. Oh, okay. Yeah. It's pretty common, unfortunately. So, some risk factors. Now, when we go over risk factors, keep in mind just because you have risk factors does not mean you're guaranteed to get Alzheimer's or dementia, okay? It is definitely avoidable, but it is more common as we get older to get a diagnosis like this after the age of 65. Family history is definitely a big deal. There is, earlier in the class, I mentioned a local neurologist. He does the genetic testing. So if anybody has family members with Alzheimer's or a history of family members with dementia, you can go to a neurologist and get genetic testing to see if you are at a higher risk. And the more family members you have with the disease, the higher your risk gets. But again, that does not mean you're guaranteed to get it. Okay, even if both of your parents had Alzheimer's and passed away from it, it still does not mean you will absolutely get it. And that's another reason that I love giving this talk, because there's so much new research out and ways to prevent it, even if you have strong genetics for it. We talked about head injury. That's a tough one because once that part of the brain is damaged, it's really hard to, it doesn't technically repair itself fully. So if somebody has had multiple concussions from falls or car accidents or anything like that, and you notice them starting to show some symptoms, you do want to get them to the doctor as soon as possible. Cardiovascular risk factors, that's not really surprising, is it to anybody? No, because if somebody has uncontrolled high cholesterol or heart issues or even diabetes, things like that cause the risk of dementia to go up. If you have a healthy heart, you'll have a healthy brain, vice versa, right? Unhealthy lifestyle, life in America. I know we've talked about this in other of my classes, but uh, the lifestyle that a lot of Americans have, you guys, I'm not worried about because you're here learning, you know your stuff, right? It's the people on the couch at home that I worry about. But sedentary behavior is so common now. People are sitting more than ever all day long, right? People aren't challenging their brains anymore, sometimes doing just mindless scrolling on the phone, watching TV, not socializing with other people, maybe eating a bad diet. All of those things are contributing factors, right? So the healthier our lifestyle, the lower our risk really for any chronic condition, not just dementia, but for heart issues and diabetes and all those chronic conditions. Okay, so sometimes people wonder how dementia gets diagnosed. We talked about neurologists. That's the most common type of doctor to diagnose dementia because they specialize in the brain and all functions of the brain. Your doctor may or may not screen you when you go see them, your primary care doctor. So sometimes they'll ask you questions like, okay, I'm going to tell you three things, three words. I see people nodding. Yes, you've experienced this. Three words that they want you to remember. And then after the conversation, they ask you what those three words are. That they're not going to diagnose you with dementia if you can't tell them what those three words are. They're just going to do some screening to see if you might be a referral to a neurologist, right? But it's a neurologist usually who makes this diagnosis. So, how do they do it? Well, first, they do a complete medical history. Does this person have a history of depression or anxiety? Because I tell you what, if they do, they can show symptoms of dementia if the depression has gotten severe enough. If they're on mental health medications, the side effects of the medications can also show symptoms of dementia. There's a lot of different medications out there that have side effects like cognitive, like a foggy brain, or dizziness or fatigue. If you're fatigued, your brain's not going to feel sharp, right? And I was working with somebody recently who was very getting depressed because she felt so unmotivated all the time. Like she knew she needed to do things, but she couldn't bring herself to do them. So we went over all of her medications and the side effects, and like 8 out of 10 of her medications had a side effect of exhaustion, like fatigue. So I'm like, this is why you're exhausted, right? So, first thing your neurologist should be doing is going through your medications and determining are they taking anything that can be causing these symptoms? So, basically, they're ruling things out, right? They're ruling out other medical conditions, medications being a cause. In some cases, people were just dehydrated and showing symptoms, or not breathing enough, which I know sounds crazy, but the lack of oxygen can cause dementia symptoms too. There are so many different things. So they want to rule all of that out. Then they're going to do a neurological exam where they're going to assess things like critical thinking, memory recall, just testing all the different parts of the brain and how they work. They might ask concept of time, like what's today's date? Who's the president? When is your child's birthday? Little things like that, just to see if they're able to recall, right? But if you are with a family member who is really charming and knows there's an issue but doesn't want anybody to know, you got to watch out for that, right? Because if the doctor asks them, who's the president? They could say something like, I'm retired. I don't pay attention to that stuff, right? Or what's today's date? Who pays attention to that at my age, right? So you want to make sure, and neurologists are usually good about that because they see it all the time. But if this person is trying to fool the doctor, you want to make sure you pull them aside and tell them what you're noticing, right? Because this person's not going to want anyone to think there's anything wrong with them in a lot of the cases. Brain imaging is also done, hopefully. MRIs, CAT scans to look for different damages in the brain, and mental status exam. Has this person not slept for 2 months? Maybe that's causing an issue. Again, is it depression or anxiety that hasn't been diagnosed? So they're going to rule all of these things out. They're going to also test for balance, reflexes, do a complete physical exam of muscle tone. They might have them draw a clock like this and ask them to draw, say, 3 o'clock. And that's a big test for Alzheimer's. So they know what they're looking for, right? They're going to put them through a thorough evaluation before they make an official diagnosis. And it might take more than one visit, too, because they might have further testing that needs to be set up. Any questions on this? Go ahead. Yes, you're right. And vision too. Um, so the neurologist I told you about, he has this huge chart of risk factors, and vision and hearing are there. And he has people checking their blood sugar levels, and he has people taking their blood pressure, and do they know their cholesterol numbers and the breakdown. I mean, he has them tracking pretty much everything, because obviously the less medication we're on, the clearer we're going to think, the less risk we are at falling. So he's trying to keep people off medication as much as possible. Of course, it can be life-saving and necessary, but when we start taking cocktails of 15 different pills a day, sometimes that gets hard because there's so many side effects at that point that sometimes people are just taking a new medication to manage side effects of another medication, and then it snowballs, right? I think we've all seen somebody like that. And then, of course, it gets hard for that person to keep track, right? As people get older, it's harder and harder to keep track of the medication. Like, okay, I take this one when, and with food, without food, morning, evening, how many a day? That's overwhelming for people, right? Especially as they get older. So, once the diagnosis happens, depending on what kind of dementia it is, um, I'm going to start talking mostly about Alzheimer's just because that's the most popular form. But there are some medications that some doctors will prescribe in the beginning stages of Alzheimer's to help slow the progression. I will say, doesn't always work for everybody. I've heard stories both ways. There can be side effects that can be pretty severe. So that is definitely a conversation to have with the person's doctor on whether or not they should start taking a medication. But especially if they have like a mental health condition or something like that, there might be some medications that can help. Therapies, there's multiple types of therapies that can help when somebody has Alzheimer's. Physical therapy helps with the balance. A lot of times as that disease progresses, people's balance starts to go, their muscles start to get weaker, and physical therapy can help a lot to prevent falls. Then you have occupational therapy that can help the person with personal hygiene, showering, toothbrushing, doing laundry, things like that. And then speech and language pathology therapy can help the person having conversation. It will help them remember how to chew in some cases, because as Alzheimer's progresses, chewing gets more difficult, swallowing gets more difficult, and speech and language pathologists can actually help with that too. I used to not know that. I thought they just help with speech, but they actually help with the swallowing and chewing of food. And then modifications for safety are important too, like taking knobs off the stove, or maybe putting locks on the door, or making sure the person's not going to trip on things in their home, just overall safety precautions. Okay, so this is the big part. If you have not listened to anything else I've said this entire talk, I want you to really pay attention on this one, okay? So if you have a pen, I'm not sure if you do or not. If you don't, I will get you one because actually I feel like this is really important. Raise your hand if you need a pen and we'll take care of that. Okay. So I'm sure. Yeah. Thank you, Denny. Uh, well, they work in various ways, but overall, they're designed to delay progression in memory decline. I'm not really sure, to be honest. Yeah. And I would like to know more about that too. But yeah, if anyone's family member um, is told, this is an option for you if you'd like to delay the progression of your disease, have a good, solid conversation with that doctor who's prescribing to make sure you understand how it works, potential side effects, all the information. Yeah, I've heard both ways. I used to actually think the same thing, but when she said she has heard most of the time the medication to prevent the progression of the disease doesn't work. But I ran into somebody at the Alzheimer's walk actually in Burlington this past time. And she said her mom was put on one of these medicines, could not tell you the name of it because I don't remember, but her mother did really well for 20 years to follow. But again, we don't know if it was genetics. We don't know if it was great lifestyle choices. There's so many variables, right? So it's hard to say whether or not that was the medication by itself. Yeah. Okay, so you all have pens now. Find a blank part or, a small part to write on and write down numbers 1 through 6. And these are 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine that have been researched to decrease Alzheimer's by as much as 60 to 80%, even if somebody has genetics for it. So, number 1 is nutrition. We all know that's important, right? So, Mediterranean diet is the happy medium for pretty much all chronic conditions. It really is. Like, if you follow the Mediterranean diet, there's so much research behind it. Your chances of having a chronic condition or having one get worse are a lot smaller, right? Again, lots of variables, right? We just never know. And if you want to really take it a step further and get even more strict than Mediterranean diet, the whole research is showing to whole food, plant-based. In fact, that's what the local neurologist is doing as part of his program. So whole food, plant-based means really just avoiding animal products in general. Not easy to do for most people. It requires a whole new level of learning to cook. Taste buds will change and adapt. Don't worry about that. But again, Mediterranean diet's a great happy medium. Number 2, physical activity. Shocking, isn't it? You guys have heard sitting is the new smoking, right? There's so much research coming out at the dangers of being sedentary now. Anyone remember how many minutes a day are, it's up on the screen, never mind, you'll cheat. 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity physical activity is recommended for overall good health. And that's what the research stands behind. And it's a minimum of 150 minutes. So to reach moderate activity, you don't necessarily have to check your heart rate all the time. You can go by how you feel. You should be able to have a conversation. You're going to be out of breath, but you should be able to have a conversation and not be able to sing if you tried. So that's where your heart rate would need to be for 150 minutes per week, broken down however you want it to be. A lot of people will do 5 times a week, 30 minutes, but you can break it up however you want. Yes. Yeah. So anyone in this group, if they see you trying to sing while you're out for a walk, they'll know exactly what you're doing. And they'll leave you alone. If you want to do even better with physical activity, you want to add 2 days of major muscle groups strength training to keep the muscles strong, right? So 150 minutes of physical activity that's more aerobic, and 2 days minimum of major muscle group strength training. That does not mean you have to get into a squat rack and do squats. Doesn't mean you even have to go to the gym. You can literally stand up and sit down in a chair 20 times, and that's the same thing as a squat mostly, but it still works your leg muscles and it's safe, right? So I could spend a lot more time talking about that, but we only have so much time. Okay, so that's 2. Number 3, stress management. Another shocker, right? You can have a great diet, you can work out regularly, you can even sleep great. You cannot drink, you cannot smoke. If you have chronic stress, that might trump everything. So it's easier said than done, but if you're not able to control the stress or anxiety in your life, you do need to find some more coping mechanisms and ways to calm your central nervous system. And that can be things like meditation, yoga, anything that makes you feel calm. Very important. I'm gonna ignore that, but that there's so many mixed feelings on that, and for different reasons. Like, I'm not against it. I'm really not. My whole family makes it, but there's a point of diminishing returns. I know. And it is on the Mediterranean diet, which is not shocking because it's the Mediterranean, right? Like, who doesn't drink wine in the Mediterranean? You'd be disowned. So that's 3. So number 4 is restorative sleep. Restorative sleep. Yes. Notice I used the word restorative. Yeah. So some people, as we all know, especially as we get older, some people sleep deeper than others, right? Some people sleep longer than others. Some people get lots of interruptions while they're trying to sleep, bathroom trips, or just overall wake ups, brains not being able to shut down. Overall, the research says 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep. Most people, not everybody, but a lot of people, don't understand that the brain is not relaxing or sleeping while you sleep. The brain's actually super busy. What it's doing is it's cleaning out all the toxins that have formed over the course of the day. Things are being regenerated. It's storing the memories. So, like what you learned today in class, when you sleep is when your brain remembers it, right? So, if we don't sleep and get rid of the toxins and form the memories and regenerate anything that needs to be rebuilt, over time, things that aren't so good can happen, right? Like, you guys remember Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, and they used to brag about the amount of time or how little sleep they needed. Like, oh, we only need 5 hours of sleep a night because they were such hard workers and could function great. Do you remember what both of them died of? Yeah. Not saying that that's exactly why, but all the people in our lives that brag about how little sleep they need because it's a sign of being strong and successful and having good work ethic, they're not doing good things for their health, right? So that's why that 7 to 9 hour window is so important. I could teach a whole other class on sleep, but there's a couple things you need to be aware of, and then I'll move on. One is the use of things that have the same ingredient as Benadryl. The ingredient in Benadryl that makes you sleepy can actually cause cognitive decline if it's used long term, right? Go ahead. Melatonin is probably the most recommended by doctors for good reasons. Sleeping pills are a whole other story. This neurologist that I work with, he kind of educated us on sleeping pills as far as the brain doesn't really go into restorative sleep when on sleeping pills. I forget exactly what the process is, but they're not designed to take long term. If somebody's struggling with insomnia and they're not going to sleep and that's a danger, there's a point where it's actually very important. But if this is your first time being prescribed sleeping pills, you may want to ask your doctor to just try it for a short time and see if your circadian rhythm gets back in check. And then maybe he or she can wean you off the medication, see how you do. So, different things that you can talk to your doctors about. Remember, I am not a doctor, so if you decide to do these things, you need to talk it over with your doctors. Go ahead. I'm not sure what's in that, to be honest, besides melatonin. I don't know what else is in there. But I would write that question down and ask your doctor about it. Yeah, that's a great question. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. So, when you're sleeping, you're going through multiple stages of sleep, 4 stages, right? And you have to go through all 4 stages multiple times over and over through the night to get the amount of restorative sleep that you need. So all at once is the short answer. Naps are helpful. They'll help with energy and help you refocus, but your brain does not do everything that it needs to do with a nap. It only does it in that period of 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Go ahead. Oh, yeah. Mm, mhm. Right. Mhm. So it takes about an hour to 2 hours to even get into your first cycle of REM sleep. And then your longest cycle of REM sleep happens later in the night, and it can last up to 90 minutes. REM and deep sleep are the most important, which again is why we want to try for that 7 to 9. And it's so hard, I know sometimes, but towards the end of that cycle is when we get the most benefit of the sleep. Hopefully that answers your question. Mhm. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Not, I don't know if you can do that on purpose. Um, of course, the calmer your brain is before you go to bed, the better. And that's one reason to turn off the devices. But the other reason is the blue light, right? Because the blue light coming from the devices is what tells your brain to not make melatonin. It's time to wake up, right? So that's why they say to turn those devices off before bed. Um, Everybody's circadian rhythm is so different, and there's so many variables involved with a good night's sleep, I think, as we all know. So it could be anything hormonal. We just don't know. Some people are super lucky and they just sleep all night long like a rock and have zero issues, right? And then others will sleep 2, 3 hours, be up for an hour, go back to sleep. It just varies with everybody. But there are sleep specialists, just so you guys know. There's cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So if anybody ever knows somebody that's experiencing that, that's the first line of defense recommended, along with a short, brief medication to get that circadian rhythm back in check again. Go ahead. Mm, yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. 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 Yeah, that's good you've experienced that. I think sometimes when you just hear it and don't understand the science, which is like so many people, right? Because there's articles all over, but they don't explain the science behind it. But we are designed to get sunlight. This is where we come from, right? We're designed to get sunlight during the day for a reason and have dark at night for a reason. And if we don't, including lights from TVs or phones, then our brains are going to get a signal saying, not time to make melatonin, right? Yeah, good. I'm glad you do that because that's so good for you to do. That whole hygiene for sleep is a real thing. There's more and more science coming out on it too. Yeah, it's a very important thing that people didn't even used to think about, right? And now it's a conversation happening in a lot of doctors' offices. All right, so sleep. Number 5, social connection. Even if you don't like people or you're an introvert, you still need to find people to connect with socially. Volunteering is good for you, going to church, things like that, Bible study. Of course, you can be in a room full of people you don't know and talk to people, and that's not always what you need. You need to kind of find your people, right? And since you're living here, I know there's multiple opportunities of social connection, so I don't have to tell you much about that. And number 6 is avoiding toxic substances. Can anyone name what a toxic substance might be? An example of one. Alcohol. Say that again. Cleaning supplies with chemicals. Absolutely. Yep. So, like bleach, ammonia, laundry detergent, dishwashing detergent with the strong scent, right? Things that you put on your hairspray. Yeah, like all the things we need, right? Stuff you put on the skin, smoking, chemicals in general, right? It's pretty easy if you just kind of simplify it. We want to avoid chemicals, period. Say that again. Oh, yeah. Pollen. Well, if you have an overreacting immune system and get allergies, yeah, pollen is no fun for sure. Agreed. But chemicals, yeah. I wish I could avoid pollen. Yeah. There's a lot of it right now. Things you breathe in, things you put on your skin actually get absorbed into your bloodstream. So shampoos, makeups, lotions. It's really scary, but we are bombarded by chemicals on a day-to-day basis every single day, right? So that's why it's not just alcohol and smoking. We really do want to try to get the chemicals down as much as we can. So now you have 6 pillars, right? So has anyone seen there was a show called The Last Alzheimer's Patient on CBS with Sanjay Gupta, and he had Dr. Dean Ornish on the show. Dr. Ornish was known for his work in cardiology at Cleveland Clinic, but his mother passed away from Alzheimer's, and he realized that the work he was doing for cardiology, lifestyle medicine, was also working to prevent Alzheimer's. So these 6 pillars I just gave you are known as lifestyle medicine pillars. And the latest research is showing that if somebody follows all 6 pillars as like a B plus or higher student, which is, I know, can be hard, their risk of developing Alzheimer's gets significantly lower. And some researchers are saying if you follow these pillars strictly, intensely, you can decrease your risk up to 80% and reverse Alzheimer's if it's a new diagnosis. So it's kind of like intensely applying these lifestyle habits, right? And it depends on the person. You know, if this is a loved one we're talking about and they're getting a new diagnosis or showing symptoms, they might not be willing to drastically change their diet. But anything that you can work on in this group of pillars is going to make a difference. There is zero question. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. That's part of it, but there's a like my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and I sat in on, of course, I was the one that took her to her evaluation, but it was a series of questions. She had to do the clock. They did the balance testing. They looked at her MRI results. They did the blood work. Everything else was ruled out, and that was the diagnosis they gave her. So it's a pretty extensive evaluation, a lot of questions, and a lot of writing evaluation too, having that person write. So yeah, somebody else said that recently that it used to only be diagnosed after looking at the brain, which was so interesting. I'm so glad that there's new evaluation data out there. She was tested at Mass General Hospital in Boston. We were very lucky to have an excellent neurologist there. Good question. Yeah. Well, I started to notice the big one of asking the same question over and over. That was a huge one. You know, like she'd ask a question, I'd answer it, and then like 10 minutes later, same question. I'd answer it. 10 minutes later, same question. And then the one that got us to take her to the neurologist was that it's the example I gave about the driving. So she used to work at Macy's in Natick, Massachusetts for 30 years. Drove there every day for work for 30 years. When I flew up to visit, there was a bus station close by that she's always picked me up at, right near where she used to work. And one day she called me and couldn't find it and was in some parking lot somewhere, didn't know how she got there. So that's the week that I made the appointment. You're welcome. Yeah. Well, the medication was offered. She declined it, and I declined it just because this was 9 years ago, so I didn't really know a lot about it at the time. 70. Yeah, yeah. Was there another question over here? Oh, go ahead. Sure. Uh, mm, hmm. Mm, hmm. So what symptoms of dementia was he having? Interesting. Oh, like trying to find a diagnosis for him. Hmm. How did they come upon that? Whoa. Sounds like it. Hmm. Oh, okay. Yep. Hmm. Okay. I get it now. So they diagnosed your husband by a brain image. Okay. So I have a theory to that. And I'm glad you brought it up because I forgot to tell you guys about this. Has anyone heard of neuroplasticity before? Has that run? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to tell you about a study that I think your husband is a good example of maybe what happened in this study. So there's a study called the Nun study, Nun. Has anyone heard of that? Okay. So it was a convent of nuns. After they passed away, their brains were analyzed. Many of them were found to have Alzheimer's. Not a single nun showed a single symptom, although their brains showed Alzheimer's, right? So, what this study was showing after review was that these nuns had been working on something called neuroplasticity, which is building new highways in the brain. So, they had social connection, they were very spiritual, right? Had a strong belief. They challenged their brains on a regular basis. So, for example, if you were to learn a new skill like quilting, following new recipes, doing crossword puzzles, playing music, dancing, taking classes, like challenging all the parts of your brain, even though your brain is at full capacity, that does not mean that you can't make new neural pathways. So, what they're saying basically is you have a couple highways that go down, there's always an alternate route, right? So, same thing that was happening in their brain. They had built up enough cognitive reserve that the parts of the brain were damaged, but the brain found alternate paths to get what it needed done. So, no symptoms. So I'm guessing your husband might have been social, did things to stay active, did things to keep his brain challenged. And I'm thinking, again, a theory, don't know for sure, no way to prove it, right? But maybe he had enough neural pathways and enough cognitive reserve that even though he had dementia in the MRI, his brain was still working. Yeah, that makes sense. So if you guys do the same thing, right? All it says is the risk can go down of showing symptoms, even if you get Alzheimer's, which is so powerful. This is the month that the neurologist and I are doing neuroplasticity, and every day he's assigning a different task. And it's things like reading the alphabet backwards, writing with your non dominant hand, uh, trying new recipes, walking a different route in the grocery store than you usually walk, trying new food. So it's not just do a crossword puzzle every day, right? Because that's only going to challenge one part of your brain. We have to challenge all the parts, right? So think of as many different things as you can do, as you can, to challenge your brain in different ways and spark these new neural pathways, because who knows, we could get dementia or Alzheimer's one day, but wouldn't it be nice to not have any symptoms and nobody ever know? As long as it's challenging. Yep, and not stressful. Sometimes those games can get stressful, right? That's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up because I almost forgot like the most important part of preventing. So, thank you. It is amazing. Yeah. Wow. There you go. He had a lot of cognitive reserve built up. It's kind of like, if you have a really strong immune system and a lot of reserve in your body and your strong, healthy body, and you were to get like the flu, you could get the flu and not even know it because your body's fighting it. So it's kind of the same thing with cognitive reserve, that you could have it, but your brain is so powerful and so has so much left in it that it's just going to find a way around. The brain is super amazing. Thank you for sharing that story. Go ahead. She she's been waiting. Oh. Uh, right. Yes. Wow. Smart lady. Hmm. Ah. Yeah. Yeah. It's a tough one. Whoa. Hmm. Good. Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. We see that a lot. Even not even just spouses, but mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, friends. I would probably be the same. I wouldn't want to admit, that that's happening. But I think the best thing to do, like if this is a fear for any of you, like if you have the genetics, just tell your family, friends, whoever's around you a lot, look for these symptoms in me, and you have my permission to take me to the doctor. And sometimes, they don't want to go for that testing, right? Like I was advised by the Mass General social worker to tell my mom it was just a checkup. Because if I told her what we were really going for, she never would have gone. Never. Right? So sometimes you have to lead with emotion if it's in that person's best interest, right? And as you've seen, there's so many things you can do if you catch this early, and there's so many important things that you have to plan for, and there's finances and all of that stuff. But most of all, if you are with this person a lot, you can do a lot of lifestyle change with them too, and delay progression, or depends on what kind it is. But we have a lot more power than we think, right? I want to just point out really quick, this is a website that we have. You do not have to be a Humana member to go to this website and view any of the classes, but Humana is running 4 health education classes every day. And some of the classes are things like meditation, some trivia, which of course is great for neuroplasticity. There's exercise classes. I mean, you name it, they're in here. So you can watch live classes led by health educators. You can ask questions in real time in the chat box, and that will be answered by a trained health educator. So a good place to go to check on resources. And if anybody needs more one-on-one support, I know we're in a big group. Not everyone's comfortable sharing their personal story or medical history in a group. You can also make an appointment with a health educator at no cost. And you don't have to be a Humana member for that either. But you do want to go through this website to schedule that appointment. And it's virtual, so they'll call you, or you can do a Zoom face-to-face meeting. Any questions? Oh, I don't think so. humananeighborhoodcenter.com. That's what we used to work out of. It was called Humana Neighborhood Center. There was one in Greensboro. And people used to come to us for these classes, but there were 31 of those across the country, and they're all shut down as of last summer. So there's 8 health educators across the country going into the community and teaching the health education. And then the rest of the team is all online. I'm one of the 8 in the country. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. Thank you for having me. Any other questions about anything? Okay. Well, I'll be back again next month. Couldn't tell you the topic. I think it's either going to be blood pressure, take control of your blood pressure, or it's going to be fall asleep, stay asleep. Sleep has been a huge topic lately. So it will be probably one of those 2 things. I'll be in touch with Michelle to get it in the newsletter and anywhere else we need to put it. Sleep? Okay. Yeah, that's a good one because you go through the cycles and you talk about medications more and sleep hygiene and things like that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, we could always do multiple ones. Go ahead. That is a blessing. Uh, yeah. Yep. Oh. Oh. Right. Yeah. Yeah, when my mom drew the clock, her numbers, like the circle was here and all her numbers were down here together. And she had the hands of the clock right, but the numbers were all together. It was really fascinating. The hands. That's hard anyway. Yeah, that some of those tests are hard, right? Yeah, it makes you kind of nervous too, which your brain doesn't work very well when you're nervous either, right? Well, yeah, exactly. Well, I wanted to thank all of you so much for your attention today. I know can be a touchy subject too, so I appreciate your questions and your sharing of stories and your experience. And hopefully, I'll see you again next month. Thanks for coming.